All right, in this PowerPoint, we're going to look at community interactions. So this is interactions between the different living things, such as predator-prey interactions, competition, symbioses, which mean two different organisms living together. We'll also look at other important interactions in communities and important species within the communities. So for these interactions, I know there's a lot of stuff on this text. Let's focus on the symbols that are here, like minus minus for competition. Competition results where two species are fighting for a resource. One wins the competition, one loses, but it actually negatively affects both of the species. The species that wins would have had more resources if it didn't have a competitor to compete with. So it's a minus-minus interaction. All the ones in the middle are plus-minus interaction. This interaction is beneficial to one species, harms another. Predator-prey interaction. The predator benefits, the prey dies. So it doesn't do well. Herbivory can include the whole plant get eaten by an herbivore. It can also include part of the leaves are eaten, but not the whole thing. The plant survives, but it's negatively affected because it's lost some calories to the herbivore benefits. Parasites, same thing, disease, plus-minus interaction. Mutualism is a plus-plus interaction. It's a symbiotic interaction, and both species benefit from that affiliation. We'll give some examples later. And commensalism is another symbiosis. Two species live together. One benefits from the association, the other doesn't care. So for competition, this represents two species of protists called Paramecium. Paramecium aurelia in blue and Paramecium caudatum in red. When you grow them by themselves, so just the red in a container by itself, just the blue in a container by itself, they tend to show this logistic growth curve, an S-shaped population curve, exponential increase until you get close to carrying capacity, level off at the carrying capacity. Relatively rapid growth up to the carrying capacity. If you don't grow them separately, you grow them together in mixed culture, they, in this case, Paramecium aurelia in blue wins the competition. It increases, uses up more of the resources more efficiently, and Paramecium caudatum then declines toward extinction. Now, if you look at the slope of this line compared to the other it grew rapidly up to the carrying capacity, and here it grows more slowly. Even the winner is basically slowed down because it loses some resources to Paramecium caudatum. So when do they compete? In both cases, there is competition occurring. Interspecific competition occurs between two different species. So that's the bottom graph, the mixed culture graph. When they are grown together, Paramecium aurelium grows more slowly. You can see the slope is more shallow. It's not so steep as it is in the top graph. This is called interspecific competition because it's between two species. So if you're good at interpersonal communication, that's communication between two different people. So inter. Intra is within the same species. Intraspecific competition, the top graph, when it's just Aurelia grown by itself. It grows, it reaches the carrying capacity, and at that point it's competing with all the other members of the same species. So that's called intraspecific competition. Same thing with caudatum here. A real-world example, the other one was from the laboratory. These are two species of barnacles. Thamellus is how you pronounce the small one. It's got a silent CH. The Balanus is the bigger one, and they're fighting for space on the rock. And as they grow next to each other, you can see some of them, they're touching each other. And if Balanus grows any more, it can knock Thamellus off the rock. So Thamellus generally lives higher in the intertidal. It can deal with drying out better than Balanus can. But if Thamellus then settled lower in the intertidal, it would be fighting for resources with Balanus. Or in areas where they overlap, they're going to fight for resources. So that's interspecific competition. Intraspecific competition would be just Balanus growing by itself. And that's what this picture is a little fuzzy, but that's what it shows. They grow very closely together in tight aggregations, but doing so gives each individual less of a foothold on the rock, and so it's easier for a big wave to knock them off. In the intertidal areas and slightly supratidal areas of marshes, you have the same sort of thing, and it leads to zonation of the salt marsh, and it's based on competition and physical tolerance. The species that are lower in this case are not good competitors, but they're good at tolerating salt water. So Spartina alterniflora, the salt marsh cordgrass, lives in the low intertidal, does well because it doesn't have to deal with any competitors. You get a little higher, you get Spartina patens, which is salt meadow hay, and it's a better competitor than alterniflora. And then as you get higher, Juncus gerardi is black needle rush, and then you get some high marsh plants, flowers and stuff, and then Iva fructescens, which is saltbush, or Phragmites can live higher in the intertidal. And you see the zonation pattern because they basically grow in the area that they can tolerate well up to the point where they reach a competitor, and the competitor is usually better the higher up you get. And so that will lead to some pretty strong zonation in the intertidal, but it's because of competition. A lot of times organisms will basically divide up the resources so that they don't compete. And we see this for anole lizards. A. insulatus, the species at the top, lives up on the top on shady branches. It's usually brown with short legs. It doesn't need long legs to be able to survive in that area because it can just camouflage itself. It's not competing with the ground-dwelling lizards for bugs because it eats the ones that are up in the canopy. In contrast, the ones like Disticus lives down on the ground or on fences, long legs, runs fast, a little bit more mobile because it's catching active prey on the ground. It's not competing with Insulatus because it lives in a different region. And so they basically divide up the habitat accordingly. Same sort of thing for warblers. As MacArthur's study of warblers found that Cape May warblers were on the highest small branches, yellow rump warblers on the bottom and the middle. And the other species were kind of in between. So you'd find more than one species persisting in an area because they're feeding in different regions of the tree, so that they reduces their competition for bugs. So some species interactions that this can make a predator good at getting a prey or a prey good at getting away from a predator. So a snake has, effectively it's a double hinge jaw. There's a couple of places, bones, where this can form a joint, and it can allow the snake to engulf prey larger than itself. The teeth are pointing backward, preventing the frog's escape, and the skin is stretchy to allow the snake to consume a larger predator like this, or a larger prey item like this. In species interactions with herbivores and plants, a lot of times the herbivores will specialize on one plant. This is a monarch butterfly caterpillar feeding on milkweed. Milkweed produces a kind of a milky latex, hence the name, that's full of toxins. And the monarch butterfly is one of the only ones that's able to deal with the toxin. It's evolved ways to fight the toxin, and it actually holds on to it, so then it becomes toxic to other organisms, and it uses it as a defense mechanism, and it uses this bright contrasting coloration as warning. Other predators have a beak adapted to feeding on a particular food. Cardinals with a thick seed-cracking beak. Parrots will also crack larger nuts and use the hook at the end to tear the meat out. Eagle will tear meat from carcasses and fish and things like that. Flamingos sifting through the mud upside down, their beak is shaped in a way that is conducive to that. The anhinga actually swims around in the water and will stab fish with the bill, or grab fish with its fish-spearing bill. Pelican will scoop them up in a kind of a dip net. The American avocet can burrow in worm burrows, but it actually kind of scrapes it back and forth across the surface, and the tip of the beak is really sensitive, so it can pick up small invertebrates. The raven's sort of a generalized beak. A little bit good at everything, incredible brain, really intelligent bird, can pick up oysters, can pry oysters or mussels off of the rocks, raise them up about 50 feet up in the air and drop them so that the drop will then crack that open. Each beak shape gives you a clue about the bird's diet, and each one was designed by evolution to perform a specific job or a specific function. Likewise, prey items have ways to deal with predators. This frog is cryptically colored or camouflaged. Same sort of thing with the stick bug on the right-hand side. And the behavior is such, the frog doesn't move much. That would give its position away. As the stick bug moves, it moves like a stick blowing in the breeze. The ocellus or eye spot of a fish basically provides kind of a deceptive coloration. The predator thinks the back end of the fish is the front, and it might go for that instead of the actual head. Predators want to swallow their prey whole, head first, and you can see the spines on the butterfly fish on the right-hand side. The spines face backwards, so if it was to grab the wrong end, the prey could potentially get away. There's also bars of disruptive coloration on here. It makes it harder for the predator to focus on one. Batesian mimicry is basically where one species mimics another. A harmless species mimicking a harmful species. This was discovered by Bates and named after him. So in this case, a hawk moth larva on the left is mimicking a green parrot snake. The rear end of its abdomen is actually inflatable, and if the hawk moth larva is threatened, it'll expand that, look like a snake, and a lot of predators will leave as a result of that. In contrast, Mullerian mimicry, discovered by Mueller and named after him, is when two or more harmful species mimic each other. So if a predator has had a bad experience with a yellow jacket, it's going to leave a cuckoo bee alone. If it's had a bad experience with a cuckoo bee, it's going to leave the yellow jacket alone. So lots of harmful species mimicking each other to enhance their own survival. In the tropics, these species of butterfly are highly unpalatable to moderately unpalatable. They all kind of look like each other with the contrasting orange and black and yellow. So a predator that has experienced one of these and found it to be unpalatable is likely to leave all of them alone. Mullerian mimicry, when a group of unpalatable individuals, unpalatable species, each mimic each other. One way to avoid predation is to have toxins, but if the predator is going to eat you, it doesn't help you out. So a lot of species will evolve aposematic coloration or warning coloration in order to warn predators that they're toxic. This poison dart frog is a good example. Don't eat me, I have poison, is basically what it's saying. This milkweed bug, same sort of thing, utilizes the toxins of the milkweed, but then advertises it with a contrasting orange and black pattern. Okay, this is a monarch butterfly being fed to a blue jay, and then the blue jay getting sick off of the toxins that are in it and throwing up. So which of those defense mechanisms is it? Actually, this is aposematic coloration. You can see the monarch butterfly is a striking black and orange and white color, and that contrasting color pattern basically warns the blue jay, don't eat me because I'm toxic. In contrast, the viceroy butterfly has mimicked the monarch butterfly and developed the same bright contrasting coloration. The viceroy is palatable. You could eat it. It's not toxic. The monarch is distasteful to predators. The viceroy getting a benefit by looking like the monarch butterfly, that's known as Batesian mimicry. So depending on exactly what we're referring to, if we're just looking at the monarch protecting itself, that's aposematic coloration. If we're looking at the viceroy mimicking the monarch, that is Batesian mimicry. Butterflies have a lot of different ways to avoid predators. So I'm going to go through each of these. The monarch takes up the toxin, warns the predator. That's aposematic coloration, warning coloration. Same sort of thing for the slug caterpillar, bright contrasting colors. This one even has spines that are also a deterrent to predators. Warning, don't eat me, you're going to regret it. The Pachysphinx caterpillar will feed on the leaves, but it's camouflaged to look like a leaf, so that's called crypsis. And this one actually looks like bird poop. It's a caterpillar that has camouflaged itself to look like bird poop, and this is actually relatively more common than you would think in the butterfly and caterpillar world. Here's a good example. This is a two-tailed swallowtail caterpillar. The butterfly is on the right-hand side. That's what it looks like. It goes through a series of stages called instars, where after each instar, it outgrows its skin. It basically sheds its exoskeleton, grows larger, puffs itself up, and then changes color, changes pattern, or whatever. Up through the fourth instar, it's basically camouflaged as a bit of bird poop. Fifth instar and beyond, it can't get away with that, so it shifts over to a green coloration to provide crypsis or camouflage by camouflaging itself like a leaf. Now, other species interactions. So we said symbiosis is living together. It doesn't just include ones where it's a positive interaction. A parasitic interaction is technically a symbiosis, but it's a plus-minus interaction. This is a species known as the botfly, which is found in Central America, especially in areas that have cows and cattle ranching. And what happens is the fly is an inch or two long, so much too big. It's going to get, if it tries to lay its egg on a prey item, it could potentially be swatted. So what it does is it finds a mosquito, lays its egg on the mosquito then comes and bites you, and as it does, the botfly egg drops off, the hatches, and then the larva then buries underneath your skin, and it grows until it's about an inch long. It's got these spines sticking out, so it kind of lodge itself in your underneath your skin. Extremely uncomfortable. And then after that, if you let it go long enough, it can morph out and then emerge as an adult fly. So a lot of these parasitic interactions have complex life cycles. Commensalism and mutualism. Commensalism is another type of symbiotic interaction where one species benefits, the other doesn't care. The cattle don't care that the western cattle egret are hanging out on it. The cattle egret basically picks up bugs that have been kind of kicked up by the grazing activities of the animal. So they hang out together. The cattle egret benefits. Now notice this is not the same as in others where they might pick parasites off of it. That's not happening in this species, and it's also not a parasitic interaction where it's feeding on the skin or the blood or anything like that. There are some species of birds that will do that. That would be parasitic or mutualistic depending on the case. But in this case, the western cattle egret is commensal. The example on the right, a grouper fish, and the small fish is known as a cleaner wrasse. The cleaner wrasse will set up a feeding station, a cleaning station on the coral reef, and predatory fish will come up to have their mouths cleaned out and their gills cleaned out, and they'll allow this fish access to pick the parasites off of this area. This benefits the wrasse because it gets food, and it benefits the grouper because it gets to be picked parasite free. So it's mutualistic because it's plus. We talked about food chains and food webs in the last PowerPoint. Food chain is just a linear link from the primary producers through the consumers up to the top of the food chain. A food web shows the different ways that can occur. So you can go and find different food chains within that, so such as phytoplankton to copepod, to squid, to elephant seals, to toothed whales. That would have like 5 links in the food chain. In other cases, you might go phytoplankton to krill to baleen whales. So that would be 3 links in the food chain. For the next part, we're going to talk about different roles of different organisms in the system and ways that they can interact. This is something called a trophic cascade, whereby the presence of a top predator then has effects that are seen all the way down the food chain. In this particular case, the carnivores are the sea otters. When they are abundant, they decrease the abundance of sea urchins, and so the herbivores are rare in the system. This allows a lush kelp forest to develop. The producers are abundant. So the carnivores keep the herbivores in check, allowing for increased abundance of herbivores. And we see that kind of on the left-hand side of this graph. Otters are at or near their maximum. Sea urchin biomass in 1986 or 87 is low, and the total kelp density is very high. In contrast, in this particular area, what happened was the fish population crashed, so the seals ran out of food. So instead of a killer whale focusing on seals, which are larger, more fat content, more nutritious, they shifted over and actually fed on sea otters, which are kind of small and scrawny. But when this happened, the top carnivore then made the carnivores rare, herbivores became abundant, and then the primary producers became rare. And you see that on the right-hand side of the graph. Otter abundance was down to about 25% of the maximum count. Grazers increased dramatically, decreasing the abundance of the primary producers, the kelp within that system. Others have an effect. So the otters are what's known as a keystone predator. They're not very abundant, but their effects can affect the whole rest of the system. Payne's sea stars, same sort of thing. The sea stars are not that abundant, but when they are present, they basically keep the system diverse and keep the mussels in check. In Payne's experiment, this is Pisaster ocraceus, the sea star that he used. With Pisaster, you get 17 to 20 species present on the rock, and in the plots where Pisaster had been removed, it dramatically declined from 18 species down to 2 or 3 species over time. So the mussels basically dominate everything and outcompete everything else. In contrast to the keystone predators like Pisaster, the sea star, or the sea otter, there are other species that are important in ecosystems just because they're abundant and dominant. So salt marsh cordgrass in the marsh, very, very abundant. It affects all of the dynamics within the system. Trees in the forest, they're important because they are abundant within the forest. So these are called foundational or dominant. At the base of an arch like this is showing, that's the foundation. Big, solid forms the foundation. In contrast, at the top of the arch, there's a stone that fits into the top piece. That's called the keystone. And it basically holds the rest of the arch together. It's not very big, it's not very abundant, but it affects the whole structure of the system. So the sea otters would be keystone species within this system. They by themselves are not that abundant, but they keep the urchins in check, allowing for the kelp to thrive. In contrast, an ecosystem engineer modifies the ecosystem. So a beaver cutting down trees near an area, damming up a river, actually converts a stream from a fast-flowing stream to a slow-flowing pond. And so it's not that it's directly affecting the plants there, the willow and other plants, but it's that it modifies the whole system and converts it from one ecosystem type to another. So beaver dams can then be used if you have an incised stream ecosystem where there's a lot of erosion. It can promote more variability. It can shift it to a pond system and then more variable flow condition that basically helps to function well. And the beaver is an ecosystem engineer because it modifies the whole ecosystem.